일동.
Lunch. Let's rise and stretch a bit. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for obliging.
저는 아시다시피 여기 써 있는 대로 최민식이고
I am Choi Min-sik, as my nameplate says.
정책기획위원회
I am the member of the Presidential Commission on Policy Planning.
오늘의 이 토론은 매우 역사적인 의의가 있는
I think this session has historical significance.
반세기 동안의 남북
For over
협력의
50 years, we will have this foundation of inter-Korean exchange, and will we take a step forward? I think this is going to be a discussion talking about ways forward.
내용을 보고 오신 분들은 눈치를
Some of you may have read the paper,
남북 교류
Practical Inter-Korean Exchange is what we are pursuing.
나와야 될 것인가?
How should we invite North Korea to be more active in the exchange? So we will be dealing with practical measures.
환영해 주십시오.
Please welcome the speaker and the panel.
소개는 안 드리겠습니다.
I will not introduce the speaker and the panelists. Their bios are in the proceeding. We have with us the PyeongChang mayor, Mr. Han Wang-gi, who will start us off with a congratulatory remark. Mayor Han, please.
Hello and welcome. I am Han Wang-gi and I am mayor of PyeongChang. I would like to thank Mr. Choi Min-sik, who is the member of the Presidential Commission on Policy Planning, for agreeing to moderate this session. And I would like to thank Professor Paul Song of PUST for agreeing to speak today. And also I would like to thank all the panelists, including the esteemed Mr. Jim Rogers. The humanity continues to push itself forward to achieve great progress, but the market system, which we had hoped to achieve great prosperity, has also caused widening of the wealth gap and inequality and inequity, and therefore we need to think about the challenges ahead, especially the crisis that has been brought about by COVID-19, and also intensifying geopolitical tensions and environmental degradation are really shaking the foundation of our lives, and the human community need to come up with ways to peacefully coexist and survive together. And we need to come up with innovative ways to cooperate. I believe such efforts will help us move towards greater peace. This session will be very helpful in this regard. And PyeongChang County will continue its effort to establish greater peace on the Korean Peninsula. I hope that we will be able to achieve a greater prosperity as we maintain peace on the peninsula. I hope this session will be a productive and a meaningful one for you all. Thank you very much.
예, 이 평창 평화 포럼을 실제로
Yes, the
존재하신 군수님
mayor Han has contributed greatly to making this peace forum possible. Thank you very much.
그러면 본론을 시작하겠습니다.
Now, without further ado, we're going to go into the presentation.
어쨌든 그런 시련이나 역경을 뚫고 송경호
There have been many challenges to actually getting Professor Song to serve as the speaker for this session, but thankfully we have Dr. Paul Song with us. He is a professor of PUST, the Pyongyang University of Science and Technology. He will deliver his presentation.
Hello, everyone. I am Paul Song, as was just introduced. I am a professor at PUST, Pyongyang University of Science and Technology. I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting me to this meaningful session. It's a special opportunity to be able to share my thoughts with you. I would like to talk about the experimental attempt toward a better community. So let's think outside the box and how can we make our lives richer and have a more equitable society for our descendants. I'd like to first introduce the PUST. It was founded in October 2010, about 12 years ago. It is located in the Ranglang zone in Pyongyang City. It is the only and the first international joint venture university in the north. There are many students who are studying diligently, and the faculty is doing their best to help them. There are 550 students in the undergraduate courses and 80 students in the graduate courses. There are male and female students. There are 5 majors in 4 departments. And I am teaching in international finance. There is the bio and then electrical engineering, and there's the medical school. And at PUST, the official language is English. When the students enter the university during their first year, they are taught and they're speaking English, and after they acquire their language skills, then they go on to study their majors, and in their third year, they have to take Chinese classes. The faculty is composed of professors from the US, Canada, the UK, China, and other countries, as well as faculty from North Korea. I hope that you will continue to pay the university a lot of support and a lot of attention. I would like to say a few words about the names of the countries. We have the Republic of Korea, South Korea, and the DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK. And I would like to mention at the outset, I am going to say the South or the North. That is more neutral. And these are my personal philosophies expressed in acronyms. DJFIOS, which stands for Dreaming Just, Fair, Equal, and Open Society. So that is my personal belief. So you could express it in pure Korean or using Chinese letters. So that's compacted into this acronym. And the second acronym is FRAT, which stands for Fairness, Responsibility, which is inclusive responsibility. So you need to take responsibility beforehand. And accountability, which is taking the accountability ex post, and it has to do with compliance. And T, standing for transparency. These are the values that I think about a lot, and the rest of my presentation is based on these personal philosophies of mine. I'd like to talk about justice, fairness, and equality. Unfortunately, the world that we are living in is we see a lot of inequalities because in terms of access to opportunities, there are people who are underprivileged.
상황인데 이것을 이제 저희가 이퀄리티와
So how can we change this? Through equity and equality. I'm going to talk about this later, but equity and equality have a fine difference between the two. Equality is evenly distributed tools and assistance. So it's equal opportunity given at the starting line. And by equity, it means equity at the finish line. So equity provides for equal outcomes, and equality provides equal opportunities at the outset. Looking at the social values, then this can be summed up ultimately as justice. This is illustrated by Tony Ruth, and I agree with this. I think we are seeing improvements, and ultimately we can achieve equal opportunity and equal outcome. So that is what I wish for in our society. In modern society, we have these two paradigms of capitalism and socialism.
자본주의와 사회주의가 너무나 널리 보편적으로 이해되어지고
These are commonly understood ideologies. In the interest of time, I cannot go into details, but I'd like to just point out a few. Looking at capitalism and socialism, what is today, the problems that we are encountering it includes ESG issues, environmental, social, and governance issues. In capitalism, it is characterized by mass production and mass consumption. So it is seeking maximum profit. That is the biggest virtue, maximum profit seeking. But there is no limit as to how much profit these entities can make. So excess production is the ultimate outcome, and excess consumption, that is a serious problem. And unfortunately, this led to the environmental destruction. It was an inevitable result. So capitalism, with mass production and mass consumption, seeks maximum profit, and this is led by the invisible hand or the market, mentioned by Adam Smith, and the equilibrium is settled. But this leads to market failure. So these market failures have been witnessed. It could be with the public goods or asymmetry of information. And in making corrections and revisions, then other sets of problems follow, and this invites chronic crises over and over. Capitalism is nonetheless still the mainstream paradigm, and it's not an environment-friendly system. It has to produce a lot, and a lot has to be consumed. And so these are the issues that capitalism faces. And there are many attempts to revise or correct capitalism, but we have not found an ultimate solution to capitalism yet. And looking at socialism, it seeks community values, and it seeks equality and solidarity and creating synergy effect.
사회화 측면에서도
and it socializes risk and return. It tries to share that.
아까 자본주의
And
대량 소비와 달리
compared to maximum and mass production and consumption, socialism pursues adequate amount of production and consumption, and it tries to maximize value, not profit. So it's more value driven.
아시겠지만 이제 계획 경제, 계획을
And
주도로, 시장 경제 계획을
it's
주도로 해서
it's not dependent on the market. It's based on planned economy,
잘 이루어지지 않았습니다.
but the actual outcome did not go well as planned.
실패한 비주류 패러다임인데
So this is considered a failure,
그 부분도 다시
but I do not agree with that totally. I'll come back to this later.
적정한 소비와
So it tried to encourage adequate amount of production and consumption based on plans. And if all went well, then the environment wouldn't have been destroyed so much.
외부적인 환경도 상당히
And I think the external environment around socialism is becoming mature. I am sorry. I I taught in class in English, and it's kind of difficult for me to speak in Korean fluently. So I did talk about equality, and this illustration is by Angus McGuire. Let's look at equality and equity. So everyone is provided a box, and the public sector could say that it provided equal opportunities to everyone. But from the from the people's perspective, the fence itself prohibits us from enjoying the game. Of course, you have to make considerations from an equality perspective, but you also have to consider the equity side, the final outcome, to be able to observe the game. I know equity is a very difficult thing to solve, and you need to build up a lot of consensus to enable equity in society. And I think it would be worth our time to think about this. And maybe liberation, which a word I don't like that much, doing away with the fence could be a good solution, but we cannot get rid of all the fences, so realistically, this may not be a practical answer. So let's experimentally try different alternative paradigms. As I mentioned, people are doubting the sustainability of capitalism because it is faced with chronic crises. As for the philosopher John McMurtry, he said that capitalism is in a cancer stage in his book. And it is just receiving short-term gap measures, but that will not sustain capitalism. And Paul Kennedy wrote Rise and Fall of Great Powers. It talks about economic change and military conflicts. And he has done the study from 1500 to 2000, and he is talking about a similar diagnosis on capitalism, how it is faced with a chronic disease. And this was written back in 1987. And what was it like that back then? The U.S. was leading the economy with the Louvre Accord, and these scholars rang the alarm bells about the sustainability of capitalism. We have gone through many crises, and there was the great global financial crisis in 2007. And there was an attempt to add some socio-democratic touches to capitalism, but it didn't work. And thinking out of the box, there was a new paradigm that was attempted to add capitalist elements to socialism. And there was a dialectic approach taken. So let's base socialism first and then add elements of capitalism and try to come up with an experimental model. And so taking these new alternatives, we have gone through the dialectic model, and then we could have this evolution of a model that makes sense. So what I want to say is we need to work on the foundation of social capital that is based on social solidarity and voluntary participation. Then we can produce alternatives that can compromise the issues that come from the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the excessive buildup of the financial industry. We need to have the citizens participate voluntarily and form the social capital. That is what is required in this society. We have the economic, social, and cultural capitals, and they are in conflict with one another. And this conflict is quite meaningless. And the capital is dominant, and it is suppressing our lives. So we now need to turn our heads and pay more attention to social capital. And we need to think about the innovation of the financial management and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Science and technology itself, whether it belongs to capitalism or socialism, there's not much of a difference. The Fourth Industrial Revolution and financial innovation need to be applied properly. This is a means to an end. And we need to take some good parts of it and apply that optimally to individual communities and countries. And so we need to think about that also. In the interest of time, I will not talk about the history of capitalism too long. It started with the Renaissance and the discovery of the New World in the 15th century. So at the end of the day, it was just a buildup of greed. The history of capitalism was all about that. Discovering the New World, the seas are a scary space, and you discover something, and if you can discover it, it's a high risk, high return game. So you lose all or you gain all. These expeditions were financed with venture capital, and where did that come from? From the Crusade onward, there was the pest. There is the wealth, but the humans who use the wealth changed as time passed, and that changed the flow of capitalism. And there was mercantilism and then price revolution. In the 16th century up to the 17th century, Spain and Portugal, they just exploited the Latin American countries, and they took the resources home. It caused inflation, and that helped primitive accumulation of capital and laid the foundation for the financial industry. And I talked about the venture capital for the expeditions overseas. And for the risk-taking activities, people take risks because they expect certain return back. And there is a need for compensation for the risk-taking. And with the discovery of the new world, the returns were quite attractive. And in order to enhance their returns additionally, there was more excessive expeditions, and that led to imperialism. So looking at all this, the progression of capitalism started with the Industrial Revolution in the UK with the steam engine, and there was the Luddite movement, and there was the enclosure movement. And if we look back on the second enclosure movement, the people were pushed out to the cities, and this was a good part of industrialization because they had the workers, but considering it from the human nature point of view, they were losing a lot of their human side. So this led to the expanded reproduction. Exponential growth was only what mattered, and this led to many difficulties. So distorted or deformed capitalism, beast capitalism, or pariah capitalism. And in the 19th century, there was imperialism that used their colonies as the source of their raw material supply and markets. And that led to conflicts. So talking about the crises in capitalism, starting with the US, there was this post-war economic boom that lasted until the 1960s. When the World War II ended in 1945, there was the Bretton Woods system, and so the US had the dollar hegemony, and then there was the Vietnam War. And so the US enjoyed a post-war boom, and the baby boomers were born in that time. Between 1945 and 1960s, they were wealthy, and it is called the Nifty 50. These are the blue chip stocks that did quite well on the stock market. So you just needed to buy and hold. Maybe like the Samsung Electronics, they just bought some blue chip shares and they had the wealth to sustain them for life. And so their thinking became more liberal, and they were more market-driven and efficiency-driven, and they were given more choice. And to the government and to the public sector, they were a bit skeptical. They wanted a smaller government. In 1956, there was the Suez crisis, and the U.S. hegemony was solidified even further. And then the Vietnam War ended, and there was the Nixon scandal. Of course, the Nixon scandal was before the end of the Vietnam War, chronologically. But there was the oil shock, and there was the fourth war in the Middle East, and this had threatened the US dollar hegemony. The jury's out there, but the Bretton Woods system ended, and the US dollar depreciated, and they were able to sustain the dollar with high interest rate, and they tried to recover their dollar hegemony with the oil dollars. And with Reaganomics and Thatcherism, neoliberalism and globalization theories permeated, and with the Washington Consensus, the neoliberalism spread, but there was the Black Monday. There was the Louvre Accord, but the policy agreements crumbled, and from then on, Alan Greenspan was the governor of the Fed, and there was excess liquidity in the market. There was the ticking time bomb expression and exuberation, irrational exuberation. And because of these situations in the market, we have the current problems. Simply put, uncertainty and volatility. And because of that, wider gap between the haves and the have-nots. Of course, this income disparity is not all that bad if the disparity serves the good of a bigger cause, but if it's the reverse, then it's dangerous. And after the war, Germany and Japan rose as economic powers, and the US tried to put them in check. And looking underneath the surface, during the Cold War, the US tried to check Germany and Japan, and the neoliberalism was transplanted to other parts of the world, and the Asian financial crisis broke out. It was mostly the developing nations, the emerging nations in Asia. And social capital was regarded important, especially in Korea. There was the gold collecting movement. In 1907, when we were under Japanese occupation, the people gathered their money to pay off government debt, and then a similar measure took place in the 1930s, the people chipping in to save a nation in crisis. And then there was the gold collecting movement in Korea. And this is not a sole problem for the US, but what was the catalyst was the TMT stock speculation leading to the dot-com bubble. Amazon.com was referred to as Amazon.bomb in a publication, Technology and Media and Telecom. The tech stocks were the target for speculation, and that led to a dot-com bubble. This is considered a risky moment when the bubble bursts. The people are hard hit. And in 2007 and 2008, there was the Great Recession or the global financial crisis. And at the time, unfortunately, only stopgap measures were applied, quantitative easing, and 10 years later, because of COVID-19, the world economy is paralyzed. And so these show that maybe capitalism is not sustainable because we continue to see these chronic crises. And there have been attempts made to correct or revise capitalism. There have been experiments, and there are other measures to deal with climate change and environmental risks. But there is a conflict among the economic and social and cultural conflict, so the new experimental measures are not effective. And there's a food company called Danone, and the CEO, Emmanuel Faber, was a pioneer in ESG management, but he was kicked out of the office because his company did not return well with his ESG management philosophies. And so these attempts are being made, but we still have a way to go, a long way to go. So what should we do about it? And looking at socialism briefly, maybe people who are familiar with the Bible, you may know about Jubilee. For every 50 years, you're able to write off your debt, sort of. And that is the primitive form of Christian socialism. And upon entering the Middle Ages, Henry VIII of Great Britain parted with the Roman Catholic Church and established Church of England, and the Jubilee spirit was dissipated. But there have been efforts made to try to recover humanity and to make corrections to the greedy side of capitalism. So there was a rise to utopian socialism. Thomas More wrote Utopia, and Bellamy talked about socialism, equality, and painted a rosy picture of the future. And there were elements of enlightenment. Henry George, Owen, Saint-Simon, these people appeared. And also there was the rise of Fabian socialism. And I am a member of this school, and I have lived in the UK for a long time. And I think these thoughts form the foundation of socialism. And this also contributed to the formation of the Labour Party in the UK. But the initial socialist movement in the UK failed, but the social revolution first took place in Russia. Socialism evolved and took on many forms. And there is cyber sin or cyber socialism. This is a necessary condition for a new paradigm. There was the old gas system in the old Soviet Union, and there was the project CyberSyn in Chile. The Santiago government had the factories and the central government connected through a network. And they wanted to implement a planned economy, but this did not work out because the technology was not mature enough, and I'll come back to this later. And the third road, or the third way, and Arab socialism, Latin American socialism, and these are some meaningful forms of socialism. And we see traces of socialism in Korea as well. There was the Donghak philosophy, which equated the people with the heavens, and there was the Shilhak philosophy, which pursued practical things. And they pursued the well-being of the community as a whole. And I think these are philosophies worth looking back on. And as for Arnold Toynbee, he praised highly of the Korean value of familial piety and respecting your elders, and that is the prototype of social capital.
So we have this environment that is very mature for experimenting with an alternative paradigm. And we have moved from the age of industrialization to the information age. So we are undergoing this transition. And you will see later in a table that in terms of the means of value creation, in terms of the required capital and scalability of operation and scarcity of capital on all these fronts, this information age is quite different from the previous industrialized age. And exclusive dominance of capital is actually waning, and the appeal of the scarce capital is weakening. And due to quantitative easing, there have been extensive periods of quantitative easing, and also in terms of the total size of the quantitative easing, there was great access. So scarcity of capital has gone down, really. And also interest rate has, in some cases, actually come down to below zero. And so the situation has greatly evolved over time. And because of such negative interest rate, the time value of money concept has become almost irrelevant. In the past, there was a premium recognized for the use of money over extended periods, according to the concept of TVM, but now this concept has become more irrelevant. And also, we used to rely on the capital asset pricing model, and we used to look towards capital budgeting and required rate of return concept, but these have become less relevant as we move towards the information age. In the past, during the industrialization age, the means of value creation was land, machines, so basically tangible assets, hard assets. But in the information age, the means of value creation are more intangible. And the key characteristic of intangible assets is that they are unlimited. And in terms of capital requirement, in the industrialized age, we needed to invest in factories and buying equipment and machinery and infrastructure. Of course, we do need to have infrastructure for IT even today, but after that, there is less of capex investment required when we compare against the industrialized age. In the past, when you needed to expand your business, you needed to build a new factory. But in this age, we don't need to build another factory. There is unlimited access to intangible assets that can drive value creation. And also, demographics and shift in demographics is affecting the society. In the past, the demographics, people emphasized liberty and choice, but now the millennials and Gen Z have emerged as the silent majority, and they do allow for intervention by the government and public sector as a result of a series of crises. And also, in terms of financialization, there is a revolutionary move towards financialization. There is the concept of I cubed, the three I's being information, innovation, and intangibles. These three I's are driving the fourth industrial revolution, creating a lot of changes in our society and economy. And on the news, you always hear about avatar, virtual reality, and a lot of coverage is being done on the concept of metaverse, and also DeFi, the decentralized financial system. So there's a lot of change happening at an unprecedented speed. They're leading to new choices, perhaps new forms of equity and equality, and they provide a platform for wide-ranging social and economic changes. Now, when it comes to metaverse, Steven Spielberg, the film director, produced the movie Red Player One, and in a metaverse called Oasis, he paints a picture of the metaverse in a very convincing way. So I encourage you to watch that film. And also, we are seeing the emergence of the cashless society and cryptocurrency. And with cryptocurrency, because there's no backing with hard assets, there are corrective measures being taken to, launch stable coins as an alternative. And there's also the central bank digital currency, the CBDCs are being developed. These are also very significant evolutions that will have a lasting impact on paradigmatic shift. If we look at some major pioneering thinkers, Marx's ideal was to have from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. And then there's Keynes, who prophesied that advanced labor-saving technology will allow our grandchildren to work just 15 hours a week. But this hasn't happened really because as productivity increased excessively, resulting in huge surplus in economic value, these surplus was enjoyed primarily by private sector capital, while the surplus was not really distributed to the workers. So we still have workers working extensive hours, but anyway, that was the prophecy made by Keynes. And maybe I am an idealist, but the revolution in productivity increase has, if we can achieve a double-digit or even triple-digit productivity increase, we may actually be able to achieve this paradigmatic shift faster than we anticipate today. And the super fast rise in productivity, if it happens in triple digit, we will be able to see greater flexibility of the labor market, and we will see labor becoming less about purely survival and making livelihood, but labor will become more of a development, a personal development of the self and one's ideals. And due to the pandemic, the gig economy has emerged, and now there is greater flexibility in the labor market, and pandemic has really accelerated this transition. Now, capitalism has suffered market failure, and socialism has suffered planning failure. And the cyberscene project of Chilean, as the chair of this session, I've been notified by the organizers that you have not covered, you have covered less than half of your presentation, so I think you need to move speedily because you only have 5 more minutes left for your presentation, sir. So the planning failure suffered by socialism can be overcome now with more advanced technologies, and therefore we may be able to attempt more meaningful experimentation of the socialist ideals, and we may be able to more equally distribute opportunities while
나누고 공유하고
controlling accesses of capital, and we may be able to pursue greater co-prosperity and coexistence. And in order to achieve this paradigmatic shift, we need more solidarity and more voluntary participation by all members of the society.
그래서 이제 실험적 대안의 구체적 모델로
And so as some concrete aspects of the model for this alternative paradigm,
유지 위해서 결집되는
I would like to touch upon some aspects that I have envisioned. So we need to create a framework where we can truly form a humane community that aims to achieve well-being and true equity.
여하이 새로운 패러다임을 만드는데
And we need to think about how to effectively use social capital to pursue this kind of an ideal. And we may need to have a more socialist form of fiscal control and better control of production, distribution, and consumption in an organized manner based on economic planning. And by doing so, we could also guarantee appropriate level of economic activities that does not harm the environment. Of course, this is not something that can just happen overnight. And in order to achieve this transition, we need to, for example, make efforts like nationalizing key industries to reap the fruit and better distribute the fruit of improved productivity. And also, we might need to modify the taxation system to narrow excessive wealth gap. And also, Islamic banking has the concept of zakat, which is basically about donation and sharing. So we might think of actually embracing such ideas into our financial systems. And also, we need to think about data ownership. Right now, we know that data is an asset that is valuable, but the ownership of data is often with someone else. I mean, our data is often owned, or the benefits of our data is often enjoyed by someone other than us. So we need to think about the concept of data ownership and remuneration for that data. And we need to achieve greater inclusive banking. M-Pesa is one technology that we can benchmark, which can help bank the unbanked. And there's the issue of dollarization, and we need to attempt to rebuild a currency economy and foreign exchange system to overcome dollarization. And also, we can pursue an innovative P2P banking system and token economy using blockchain technology. And I think being in Korean Peninsula leads us to think about what we can do between South and North Korea by having joint participation on both sides of the DMZ. We could create a peace community. Perhaps we could invite international organizations to contribute in the effort. And we could potentially create a peace community in which there are homes for persons with disabilities, and there are facilities to support the marginalized and disadvantaged people, and build schools. And this can help nurture new generations of Koreans from both South and North to promote the possibility of peaceful unification. So I have just thrown out a lot of ideas that have not fully been developed or matured. So I'm just throwing these ideas out there so that researchers can further develop them towards greater possibility of coexistence. So that was the spirit in which I delivered this presentation. Thank you very much.
수고하셨습니다.
Thank you, Professor Song. You know, there was an extensive lecture. You talked about a lot of historical development of capitalism and different economic systems, and also you presented a lot of ideas. So let's give a round of applause to Dr. Song for his informative presentation. We do not have a lot of time because there's another session in this same venue, so we need to move swiftly. We are going to now begin the panel discussion. We have with us Mr. Jim Rogers. I would like to hear your comments, please.
I am delighted. Thank you. It's very interesting to be here. I do first want to say that one of the things I have learned in Korea is that the word unification seems to scare a lot of people. For whatever reason, some people just say no immediately. Some people are scared, and some just are not interested. So I don't particularly use the word unification here. I use the word more of an open Korea, open the DMZ, have an open country. You've been here a few thousand years, so I would prefer to use let's open, let's abolish the DMZ, and let's have a good time. For as far as the youth and how do you appeal to the youth, they don't seem to be too interested, but I think if you explain to them, there would be no draft, there would be no military service, they wouldn't have to worry about getting killed. Everybody who's alive in the Korean Peninsula today has spent her or his whole life worried about getting killed. If you explain to people you don't have to do the military, you're not going to get killed, that might appeal to many of them. But also, if you explain, Korea spends a lot of money on defense, north and south, huge amounts of money. If you explain to the youth and other people, we're going to have a lot more money to spend on schools, highways, factories, discos, whatever you want to spend the money on, we can have a much better life. I think most people would get more interested. Most people are more interested in their own prosperity than things that are abstract to them. So if you appeal to the young people through music or K-pop or K-drama or sport, whatever, find things that people are interested in and explain to them they will have a lot more money for all of that. They don't have to serve in the military, and they're not going to get killed. When I was a kid, I was in America. I had to worry about getting killed. I didn't like it. I'm sure that the same is true of every Korean alive today. So figure out some way to interest them, appeal to them. Unification doesn't seem to be a word that appeals to people, but I do know money, prosperity, jobs, this is the sort of thing that appeals to most people, so figure out a way to explain it. And let's all have a very good time with a successful, prosperous Hanbando.
로조스 회장님 지론을 다시 듣게 되는 것 같습니다.
So thank you very much for that recommendation, Mr. Jim Rogers. Now, our
이정철 교수님 참여하고
next
계신가요?
panelist is online, I believe. Dr. Jung-chul Lee, are you there? Yes. Dr. Lee, we would like to hear your comments.
네, 송 교수님하고 짐 로저스 선생님 발표와
Dr. Song and Mr. Rogers, thank you very much for the presentation and the comments. I apologize for not being able to join you on site. Now, I would like to comment a few things about the presentation.
사실은 송 교수님 발표 내용을 보면서 드는 생각 중에
As I listened to the presentation,
진보
I thought about technological advance and information society
매우 급속하고
and how fast the changes they bring about.
맞춰 나가기 위해서 노력을 하고 있습니다.
And the global community is really working hard to keep up with all the fast changes.
많이 쫓아가지 못하는 게
But I think democracy is the one thing that has not been really able to keep up with all these rapid changes. Of the many models that you suggest,
정보 변화를
what might help democracy keep up with the speed of changes is the question that I have. I think there's a lot of conflict and difference of views because democracy has not been able to keep up with the social changes. In Korea, there were the candlelight movement, and even about that, there was mixed views. And I think this is in large part because there has not been we did not have ample social dialogue about its meaning. And so I think we need to come up with a model that would bring greater legitimacy to democracy and direct democracy and direct participation in democracy. So I hope Dr. Song can maybe comment on this. And Dr. Song also mentioned the millennials and the Gen Z in your presentation. In the upcoming presidential election and the lead up to the election, there's been a lot of talk about the influence of the MZ generation. I mean, they're a very important force in our society, and the characteristic of the Korean MZ generation is that a lot of the people are really embroiled in identity politics, and sometimes the MZ generations are very narrowly confined to their narrow, spectrum of views. So there is overprojection of the views of MZ generation to the broader society. So I think we need to come up with ways to maybe retrain, re-educate the MZ generation so that they can be more responsible and more accountable members in our society. And Dr. Song, you have mentioned the idea of combining the advanced information technology that we have to compensate for the lackings of former socialist ideas. And I think there is that potential, but at the same time, there are certain biases and some of the negative views that may have resulted with regards to socialism. I think we need to overcome the differences of views about socialism in order for such alternative models to really blossom. And I think today we are actually seeing very important geopolitical tension, and Ukraine being one example. And when countries are really preoccupied with geopolitical conflicts, we really need to help everyone think about the more communal values as humanity that is transnational. If we look at the Ukrainian situation and also in other parts of the world, it seems that geopolitical concerns of state powers are dominating the situation in the world. So we need to be able to present certain universal values that are transnational so that everyone can focus more on values that help peace rather than be preoccupied with geopolitical conflicts and interests. Thank you very much.
네. 로저스 회장님 하실 말씀 있으신가요?
Mr. Rogers, do you have anything to add?
I would just like to say one quick thing to all of the points. When you're speaking to young people, I have found that if you say to them, had you rather live in East Germany or West Germany, most of them immediately know the answer. Had you rather live in North Vietnam or South Vietnam? most people know the difference. Had you rather live in Cuba or Florida? Most people know the difference. If you say to people, had you rather live in North Korea or South Korea, most people instantly know, especially Koreans. So again, a lot of these concepts, people don't understand or scare them. But if you say, had you rather live in North Korea or South Korea, most people get it instantly, including most young people. And I certainly get the difference.
좋은 말씀입니다.
Yes, thank you for the valid point. From Sangonghui University, we have Professor Lee Nam-chu,
주관을 맡고 계십니다. 실천하는 지성이죠.
and he is serving on many advisory committees. Professor Song, thank you for the presentation. I don't have much time. I'd like to just point out or comment on three things. One is I'd like to talk about the significance of the topic dealt with today. As was mentioned by Professor Lee Jung-chul, the world politics is unstable, and I am a bit of a pessimist regarding this year. There may be many reasons playing into that. I think many people are unsure of their personal lives. Looking at the politics, looking at the nuclear issues, they're thinking of the big topics, but they're thinking about, is my way of living sustainable? I think we have to look at both micro and macro level to be able to come up with a solution. Some people may be, surprised because socialism is mentioned. But if you're not happy with your life now, what alternatives are there? What are some non-violent measures that we can try out? I think this is a good time for us to review the options, and we may experiment with them. So that's my first point. And the second and third comments are about the inter-Korean relations. If we take this approach, will there be new solutions to inter-Korean economic exchanges that came to a halt? So, could we have cooperation that can grow the growth factors, because South Korea has the manufacturing capabilities and North Korea has the resources? And if we combine the two, can we have more competitive economic structure? I think this is a good direction to think about. But listening to Professor Song's presentation, I felt that maybe the people who are challenged, the areas that are challenged in the two Koreas, maybe they could work together to produce a different kind of synergy. In the very back, Mr. Song talked about the DMZ experiment and forming a new kind of community with the challenged people in North and South Korea. We have climate change, and we're facing many global challenges. But the areas that are heavily hit, maybe they can work together. It's not, people in need getting together to beg for aid, but I think it could work in a more constructive way. So when we think about economic exchanges between the two Koreas, it's not to strengthen the already strong sector. Maybe we could work on the weak sector. And maybe, you're wondering what I'm talking about. So let me give you a specific example. I think that could be agriculture or farming. The farming areas. Intuitively, looking at the countries, I have a barometer of evaluating the quality of life in different countries. Can farming be one of the options for the people for sustainable living? If it is considered an option, then I think that's a very sustainable society. But if that is not the case, then people will be migrating to cities and aggravating the problems. And Korea is another example of that. And in the farming society, it is vulnerable to climate change. In South Korea, farming sector is challenged, and the same for North Korea. If the two farming sectors can cooperate and move on globally to expand the cooperation, I think we could find a solution. There was an important decision made at the Communist Party Congress in North Korea. They came up with a 7-year agricultural plan. They do feel the sense of crisis, and they talk about how to develop the villages, not just the farming industry, but the community itself. So I think there could be a way for the farming sectors in both Koreas to cooperate together, and I think it could open up new possibilities. So that's an idea I had. Thank you.
실천하는 지성 이남주 교수님.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee Nam-ju, for your valuable contribution.
국립경상대학교
Next, from Gyeongsang National University, Professor Kim Gong-hee will deliver his comments.
예, 예. 저는 뭐 실천하는 지성 이런 거 아닙니까?
Are you not going to provide more introduction of me? But okay, I will continue with my introduction, focusing on economic aspects. Thank you very much, Dr. Song, for your presentation. I think the presentation was very, encouraging in many aspects, and provided many positive possibilities, and I would like to maybe point two things out that I felt were important. First of all, in your presentation, you talked about how capitalism is now facing a crisis, and your suggestion is to come up with an alternative paradigm to experiment with. And your paradigm is, I think, essentially socialist. But of course, it's not the so-called failed socialism of the past. And I think your socialist ideas have been based on some improvement on the former ideas of socialism, and also it can be and also there are improvements that can be combined with socialist ideals coming from the advanced information technologies. And we see new technologies like artificial intelligence and platform technologies, which have been noted and emphasized by many scholars. And also there is this idea of acceleration. And scholars who focus on acceleration, they often talk about post-capitalism rather than socialist capitalism. So their idea is to preserve the benefits of capitalism, but also transcend the limitations of capitalism. And it seems like Dr. Song's message is similar to theirs, but one difference is that you are actually emphasizing more on aspects of capitalism to be added on to socialist ideals to overcome the limitations of planned economy that we had seen over the years. But of course, there are issues such as protection of private information, and there are a slew of other issues that we need to think about in order to make the implementation of that alternative paradigm realizable.
관계를 이렇게 정립을 할 거냐 이게 좀
So I think there needs to be further discussion on this. And my second point is this. Dr. Song pointed out that the paradox of capitalism is exacerbating. And the effort to overcome the paradox of capitalism is actually taking place within the capitalism itself. And you talked about course correction in capitalism, and such endeavors have become more extensive since the COVID pandemic. As you know, the global capitalism has actually experienced a series of crises, including the global financial crisis. And there were signs of recovery to a certain extent, but it did not really result in a full-blown recovery. And then on top of that, the COVID pandemic came and created another crisis. But during this time, the governments have intervened to keep capitalist economy from completely collapsing and kept it at least in a recessionary stage. And the governments really acted to address the failures of the capitalist model. And the governments, on the one hand, helped alleviate some of the impacts of the crisis, whereas in the past, these kind of efforts were very isolated by country. But then, for example, after the global financial crisis, there was a recovery seen in the United States that did not really spill over extensively globally. But through COVID-19, we have seen the importance of recovery of the global economy as a whole and not just of a single country. And the key reasons are that in the past, policies to overcome crises have in the past been primarily limited within the national boundaries. But because of a crisis such as COVID-19, we realize that we are a community of human beings transcending our boundaries. So the things that we had put off because of conflicting interests were taken on once again, and going low carbon has become a very important initiative that is embraced more widely across the globe. In the past, there were resistance to maybe introducing EVs in some companies, but we have since seen a lot of changes in the position of companies and in governments to really embrace EV technology. That's just one example. So the global COVID pandemic crisis has resulted in governments transcending the territorial boundaries to really improve the situation and alleviate the impact of the crisis. Korean government is launching the New Deal, and also the U.S. is also looking to invest about 5,000 trillion won worth of stimulus to improve the economy. And Dr. Song talked about the corrective efforts of capitalism. And I think these kind of corrective efforts are especially pronounced since the COVID pandemic, and these are quite different from measures like QE, which were primarily driven by individual states. And we're seeing more transboundary awareness of the crisis, and I think this can actually provide a very good opportunity for us to come up with a more practicable alternative paradigm. Thank you very much for that comment.
10분 남았는데요.
We have 10 minutes remaining to the session.
싶은 말씀이 많으실 것 같아요.
I think many people would like to voice their opinions.
딱두 분만
I would like to just take 2 questions from the floor in the interest of time. Who would like to go first?
미리 예고한 분이 있긴 한데.
There was somebody who had forewarned me that they are going to ask a question. I'm not going to call on the person. Yes, please go ahead.
남한이나 북한이나
South Korea and North Korea both need great changes. And in undergoing the change, the digital technology is bound to play an important role. And that needs no explanation. But Europe is talking about the agency of the civic society. It's not the government-led effort. It should be led by the civil society so that we can have true digital innovation. In South Korea, is it the people who are leading the digital innovation? I don't know. In North Korea, who are the innovators for digital society? I think we need to get the people ready. And I think PUST can play that role. But it should not be a few elites who should lead the digital innovation. It should be a wide society. But is that really possible? There needs to be information disclosure, but will the North Korean authorities and the relevant entities share all the relevant information with the people at large?
질문 없으니까 풀로 질문.
Thank you. We'll take another question from the floor and get the answer from Professor Song.
닫고
It seems there are no additional questions. Professor Song, please answer the question and then make a concluding remark.
예, 감사합니다.
Thank you.
깨우쳐주는 예, 토론 감사합니다.
Thank you, all the panelists, and thank you for the questions from the floor. I will do my best to respond to the questions and the comments.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate your help, and I totally agree with you. Yeah, we have to open up, and then we have to cooperate with them, and then we have to promote youth. Yeah, I totally agree. 예, so 지금 회장님 말씀하셨듯이 저희가 열려야죠.
Rogers mentioned, we have to open up. And the future generation must become more involved and participate with an open mind. If we go in depth, if they do the calculations, the reunification may be in the best interest of the future generation. So we should talk about the concrete matters. And thank you, Professor Lee Jung-chul, for your comment. Yes, I agree with you. And I did mention, I didn't have the time to talk about the millennials and the Gen Zs. The MZ generation in the US was what I was referring to. Their thinking and their attitude is different from the MZ generation in Korea. The MZ generation in Korea had experienced the Asian financial crisis in 1997 when they were young, and in 2007, the global financial crisis acted as an opportunity, not a crisis. The IMF crisis was an opportunity for the corporates to clean up their balance sheets, and they were able to do the financial restructuring. So the Korean companies were able to fare better during the global financial crisis when it hit. But in the US, the MZ generations suffered the blow in 2007. So their mentality toward the government and the Korean MZ mentality toward the government is not the same. And geopolitical considerations must come first. Yes, I do understand where you're coming from. And looking at the Ukraine crisis, geopolitically complex situation. But what I was referring to was maybe we should go one step further. The Ukrainian crisis is based on the hegemonic power struggle. The US is maintaining its hegemony in Europe and it has come into conflict with Russia. I'm not here to judge who is right, Russia or the US, but the crisis in Ukraine has come about as a side effect. We need to think about how to deal with these hegemonic struggles. And Professor Namju Lee, thank you for your comment. So people are uncertain about their personal lives, making ends meet and living every day. They should be able to lead a happy life, but if they're uncertain about their future, then they cannot go about achieving other visions. So to enrich our lives, to make our lives happier, so he talked about a possibility of potential cooperation in the farming sector between the two Koreas. Putting food on the table is a basic necessity. And yes, I do agree with your idea about maybe we could cooperate between the two Koreas in the agricultural sector. And what I wanted to point out is we need to be considerate of others. And in giving help to others, we need to be careful. We should not be too patronizing or too paternalistic. We should be humble in the act of giving. In the inter-Korean relations, I think we need that virtue even more. Of course, it's dangerous to overgeneralize based on my personal experience, but that is what I have been thinking and that is my belief throughout the years. And Professor Kim Gong-hye, thank you for your comment. I'm just throwing ideas out in the open, and I would like many people to give their feedback, agreeing with my idea or disagreeing. I think this will enable flexible thinking. I'm not saying that this could be a catalyst and let's create a whole new socialist paradigm together. That's not what I am after. We have the existing paradigm, and as an antithesis, maybe we could produce an alternative and work from there. And finally, to respond to the question raised from the floor, digital innovation. Yes, our school is named PyeongChang University of Science and Technology. We deal with international finance, so it's on the social science side. But the basic tone of the school is an engineering school. And yes, civic society taking the initiative and creating a digital society and lead the innovation. Yes, the civil society has a role to play. This could be a bottom-up approach, but I think it has to be combined with a top-down approach. In the role of the people, science and technology
위험이 배제가 돼 있는 상황이기
Uh,
때문에 기술 개발 자체가
it has its inherent uncertainties
역량이 100% 반영되는 거는
because, new technologies could be risky, so it cannot be just the people taking on the risk to develop new technologies. I think it should be combined with a top-down approach. There should be a roadmap laid out,
디지털 경제라든지 디지털
and whether it be a digital economy or a digital roadmap, maybe the people could have their input. And as for information disclosure, yes, that's a very difficult topic. To the core information or to the core data, we do not have full access ourselves, but we believe that is a constant. A university cannot change that variable, so that's a given situation. With limited access to information, what are some of the other parts of the information pool that can be shared? In that sense, I think we are making progress, and I think the day after tomorrow will be better than today. We are making progress, and I think there could be potential collaboration in the two Koreas, and it would be good to find potential areas of collaboration. And as for the issue of data ownership, who should be the winner? Right now, it's the platform players that are taking the lion's share of the profits. But I think we can have data ownership. We can take the ownership back and make money from the data that we provide to the platforms, and not just the platforms taking all the gains. With that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you.
예, 이제
Thank you very much, Dr. Song. I think we need to close this session, but before that, I would like to say a few things myself. Earlier this year, I read a book written by Mr. PyeongChang, and it gave me so much food for thought. I could not go to sleep. And I talked about my experience reading the book to a journalist, and I recommended the book, saying, it will give you excessive amounts of food for thought.
과연 우리가 남북 문제 한반도
Now, we talk about the issues on the Korean Peninsula, and we need to think about, are we really, truly the agents and the owners of the issues that occur on the Korean Peninsula? Are we not delegating everything to, someone outside of the peninsula? That is something that I started to think a lot about by reading that book. And of course, on stage, there are the politicians, people with power. But what about us? And who are the true agents in historical development? That is a question that I have. And when we think about the problems or issues on the Korean Peninsula, we should not think of North Korea as the other side and trying to benefit from whatever occurs. I think it is not right to see North Korea in that perspective, and we need to be more responsible owners of the issues on the Korean Peninsula. Now, finally, can I invite you to, excuse me, can I say one more thing? Mr. Jim Rogers, I've known, and for a long time, and he since 2015 has been giving me a lot of advice. He's a mentor, and he's a true guru and advisor who helped me as I took on my position at PUSD. So I'd like to thank Mr. Rogers for that. So can I ask everyone to just rise once again and say goodbye before we end this session? Goodbye, everyone.